You know, despite all the shiny hunting I do nowadays, I was never really successful at it for a few generations. I tried Generation 4's Poké Radar, Generation 5's Masada method. I even distinctly remember trying to hatch a full odds Igglybuff in Diamond for some reason. But it wasn't until Generation 6 that I had luck with intentionally finding any shinies. My first successful method shiny was from chain fishing, which was infamously so easy to pull off that it essentially devalued any shiny you could obtain from fishing. So instead, for my next hunt, I decided to use the Masada method to get something you could obtain from fishing. After getting my first Masada shiny, however, I then turned my attention to a method that demands quite a bit more attention from the player. I apparently really liked the Poké Radar in Kalos. According to Pokemon Home, I caught not one, not two, but 3 different Poké Radar shinies in the same day back in April 2014, and a majority of my shinies from Generation 6 as a kid come from this method. I even still use some of these Pokemon all the way in Generation 9, with the Smeargle Radar being my main catching Smeargle for over a decade at this point, and Azumarill from Route 22 serving as my go-to water and fairy type sweeper for raids. I will admit, however, that I didn't really understand what I was doing back then. The Kalos version of the Poké Radar still holds many unanswered mysteries even over a decade since its introduction, and like with its previous incarnation is mired in uncertainty, and searching for answers only returns rule sets riddled with anecdotal do's and don'ts. So I sat down with Anubis in order to dissect the radaring process, and I believe that we now know everything there is to know about this item. Let's dive into my favorite way to shiny hunt in X and Y and lay out how this all works. You first receive the Poké Radar from one of Professor Sycamore's assistants on the 2nd floor of his lab in Lumiose City after you return as champion. This assistant then asks us to field test it by using it to seek out multiple of the same Pokemon in a row. How do we do that? Well, if you've used this item in Generation 4 or watched my video covering those mechanics, tell me if this sounds familiar. When used in tall grass, a number of patches will begin to shake. Entering one of these patches will start a random encounter, and defeating or catching the Pokemon causes a new set of patches to shake, which can give you the same species as the first one you started with. Encountering Pokemon from these shaking patches back to back is known as a radar chain, and by racking up enough sequential encounters we can unlock some rather nifty benefits. The researcher will give you a target species each day, rewarding you with items for completing chains of encounters with that Pokemon. He'll give you an Ultra Ball for reaching a chain of at least 1, a PP Up for reaching at least 11, a PP Max for at least 21, and a Rare Candy for reaching 31 and beyond. If you get enough encounters to receive multiple rewards, you'll receive all of them in one go, but each can only be received once per day. A high radar chain also affects the Pokemon that spawn. After a chain reaches 21 encounters, each subsequent Pokemon during the chain will have a guaranteed 31 in one of its IVs. This bonus increases again at 41 encounters to 2 guaranteed 31s, and finally, each Pokemon encountered at a chain of 61 or more will have 3 guaranteed IVs. But the real draw of stacking your radar encounters as high as possible comes in the increased chance to find shiny Pokemon as the chain increases. These are denoted by a sparkling grass patch, and hopefully by the end of this you'll know exactly how to maximize your chance of seeing one. So after all that preamble and many weeks spent with Anubis learning all we can about the internals of this item, figuring out all the tricks and traps that kept breaking our current framework of understanding, it's time to delve into how the game actually handles radar chaining. First up, selecting patches. When you use the Poké Radar, you must stay confined to the grid and only move with the D-pad. The game will select 1 tile from the 8 directly adjacent to your character, 1 tile from the ring of 16 2 tiles out, 1 from the 24 tiles 3 tiles away, and 1 of the 32 4 tiles away. The game also selects a special 5th patch with each use that we'll get to in a moment. Unfortunately, unlike the Sinnoh region, Kalos is much less explicitly laid out with the Poké Radar in mind, so there are very few patches of grass or flowers that have the full 9x9 coverage. In cases where the selected tile doesn't contain grass, there simply won't be grass shaking on that ring. If the game fails to select any grass patches, the chain breaks, and unlike in Sinnoh, you won't even get a message indicating that this happened, just that the music will return to normal. If you stick to tiles that have a full ring of grass around them, you'll never get a chain break this way, as it's forced to pick at least one of those 8 tiles. Next, I'm gonna have to be the guy Dare warned you about and introduce you to a few types of grass. You can radar in any patch of grass in Kalos except for the extremely tall grass found on a few routes, or specifically the grass in the Friend Safari. When you activate the radar, each patch will play one of 4 possible animations, and how the grass looks and sounds while it's shaking is going to be extremely important to distinguish between them. So make sure you familiarize yourself with these animations for the area you'll be radaring in. First up, we have violently shaking grass. This grass produces loud rustling sounds and has a distinct motion that shifts side to side as well as bobs up and down, most easily seen with the various flowers. Each time the game selects patches, there's a 23% chance for the grass on Ring 1 to be violently shaking, a 43% chance for Ring 2, 63% for Ring 3, and 83% for Ring 4. If you ended your last encounter by catching the Pokemon rather than KOing it, each distance gets a plus 10% boost to be violently shaking. Another departure from the Generation 4 version of the radar is that when using the item manually, the 10% bonus remains intact until you actually enter another encounter. If your goal is a high radar chain, Violent Grass on Ring 4 is exactly what you want to be picking, as a patch passing its Violent Grass roll guarantees that you will encounter your target. Violently shaking patches also unfortunately force the Pokemon inside to not be shiny, so don't expect any surprise shinies of your changed target like you could get in Generation 4. Next, for our patches that failed our roll, we have what the official strategy guide unhelpfully calls Shaking Grass, or as it's more usefully known, Slow Grass. This type of grass has a completely random Pokemon in it, and if you step into the slow grass and a random encounter isn't your chained species, that's the end of your chain. Unknown Warrior from the Pokémon Ribbon's Discord was able to use save states to confirm that even if you get a slow grass patch, there is still a chance you can continue your chain if you get the right species. So when chaining, make sure to get the best encounter rate for your target to minimize the risk. Slow grass isn't entirely worthless though. Unlike violent patches, the shiny odds are completely untouched, giving them the potential to have random shinies. You would never want to intentionally step into a patch of slow grass during a radar chain, but it is a very slim shot at a shiny if you start your chain on slow grass versus a forced non-shiny by starting on violent grass. Now some of you who have actually used the radar in X and Y might be a little confused at the supposed strict line between these two types. After all, it's not strictly the case that stepping into a violently shaking patch will continue your chain, and plenty of people have had recorded chain breaks on grass that was clearly violently shaking, so what gives? Well, as you might be unsurprised to learn, the radar just sometimes lies to your face. Let's break it down like this. For each patch that passes its check to be guaranteed to continue the chain, it will internally be a violently shaking patch, and 100% of the time will spawn your desired Pokemon. However, there is a 20% chance that this patch will play the slow animation, and an 80% chance that it will use the correct violent animation. On the other hand, patches that spawn as slow have a 10% chance of disguising themselves as a violently shaking patch, while still containing a completely random Pokemon. This is why it's so important that you only enter violent grass that spawns as far away as possible. Having the highest chance for the grass to spawn as real violently shaken grass also decreases the proportion of violently shaken grass that actually spawned as slow grass and passed the 10% rule to disguise itself. This lying mechanic unfortunately means that it's impossible to say any violent patch is truly safe, but 4-away patches are the safest. Now, do you remember that special 5th patch of grass I mentioned earlier? Somewhere in Ring 1, 2, or 3, you may have a patch of weakly shaking grass. And can I just speak directly to Game Freak for a moment? Who made this? Who sat down, thought to themselves, hey, you know that obtuse shiny hunting method from Sinnoh that wasn't really understood at all? What if we set a Yu-Gi-Oh! Trap card somewhere in the grass that if you touch it, instantly breaks your chain and you have no chance of salvaging it with the right encounter? That's all weakly shaken grass patches do. They pop up to make sure you're still paying attention by moving 3 pixels left and right, and if you touch them, your chain is just done. At least there's a slight saving grace that if a patch of weakly shaken grass chooses the same tile already chosen by one of your other patches, it just gets overruled and doesn't spawn for that activation at all. Our 4th, last, and most desirable grass is Sparkling Grass. Sparkling Grass has a base rate of 1 in 8100 to spawn for any patch that passes its Violet Grass check, reduced by 200 per encounter in the chain all the way down to a rate of 1 in 100 at 40. Sparkling Grass will only appear if you already have a chain of at least 1, however. There are 2 exceptions to this shiny grass rate calculation. The first is that if you catch a shiny Pokemon from a shiny patch, your shiny rate gets reset back to 1 in 8100, while keeping your current chain at whatever number you reached for guaranteed IVs and how many you've seen for the radar researcher. The other exception to the shiny rate calculation is that sometimes after you leave an encounter that continued your chain, you'll have a chance to hear this alternate, more upbeat music. When you hear this music, get to the center of your grass patch with as much coverage as possible and start using the radar to generate as many grass patches as you can. As long as this music is going, your shiny rate is locked to 1 in 100. Unfortunately, you likely won't get too much time with it, as every time you generate grass, there's a 50% chance you return to the regular music and whatever shiny rate you should currently be on. This music also has the added bonus that if you do get a shiny patch within the few rolls you have with it, your shiny rate when the music leaves will not be reset. The chance that you leave an encounter and the special music starts is normally at 2%. However, while the radar was being reverse engineered by Wizard in 2018, it was discovered that some unknown condition could cause it to double to 4%. Wizard's work reverse engineering was extremely helpful in understanding how the radar worked, and is how we already knew the chance for each grass patch to continue the chain at each distance from earlier. So I'll link to their breakdown of the radar mechanics in the description. After trying a few different theories with Anubis, she found that specifically during the player's birthday, the bonus music rate becomes active. The birthday the game looks for is the one found in the 3DS profile settings. If you want to trigger this manually, you have a few options depending on if you want to trigger a time travel penalty. If you just set the 3DS profile's birthday to the day after the current one, you can wait for it to tick over to midnight and then activate all the birthday bonuses without penalizing you for time traveling. If you want a radar with the bonus right now, you can set your birthday to the next day and then set your date and time to be 1 or 2 minutes before midnight and then letting it tick over in game. Whether or not it's your birthday is only checked and set at the beginning of each day, so as long as you don't let it tick over midnight in game, you can keep the birthday bonus as long as you like from here on. So now that we know all about each type of grass and how it generates, we can go over how to best maximize our chances of reaching that elusive chain of 40 and getting our shiny rate as high as possible. First, let's go over everything that you are forbidden from doing that will end your chain immediately, even without going into any patches. Running from a battle, encountering a Pokemon that wasn't from a radar patch, entering a horde battle with Sweet Scent or Honey, not subscribing to Sir Toasty-Toes, using a field move, entering a trainer battle, using the roller skates or bicycle, leaving the current area, walking so far that all the patches end up off screen. In my testing, they're very generous with this, and it takes about 18 steps away from every active patch to be considered off screen. Using the fishing rod, triggering a story cutscene, which is listed in the strategy guide, but I can't think of any areas in the postgame after you can have the radar that both have grass to use the radar and story cutscene triggers accessible without getting too far from the patch, picking up an item, or closing the game. Surprisingly, the roaming legendary Articuno, Zapdos, and Moltres can still spawn and drag you into an encounter during a Poké radar chain, but them doing so has absolutely no effect on your chain. It also won't spawn any new patches after their encounter, and any active grass patches will be exactly where they were before the bird showed up. So with our laundry list of things not to do, here's my advice for what to do. First, stock up on good Pokeballs and as many Max Repels as you can carry. I prefer to have 40 Quick Balls as a way to keep track of how long my chain is, since I start each encounter with throwing a Quick Ball and I can see how many I've used to keep track of my chain. If you need money and have Pokemon Bank installed, you can send battle points and bring them to the Battle Mason in Kailud City to trade for vitamins that sell for 4,900 each. And if you're looking to buy good Pokeballs, the Pokeball Boutique in Lumiose City sells all of the non-standard viable Pokeballs in one place, and has some rare ones on display just to taunt you. Once you're kitted out and decide on a grass patch, find whichever spot will give you the most 4-way patches that are themselves surrounded by grass. For a full 9x9, this spot is often one tile diagonally away from the center. This spot is where you'll want to be using the radar to generate your grass patches in order to maximize your chance of seeing a safe, violently shaking patch 4 tiles away. From here, I would really just recommend familiarizing yourself with the sound and animation of the violent grass you'll be looking for. If you don't get any suitable grass, you can recharge the radar by walking 50 steps. Just be mindful to move out of line with any active patches that could accidentally force you into an encounter while you do so. Once we reach a chain of 40, we no longer have to care about getting absolutely safe patches to continue the chain. So instead, you'll want to use the radar in whichever spot has as much of the 9x9 grid covered as possible in order to give each ring the most chance to spawn on a tile containing grass. Luckily, unlike Generation 4, sparkling grass will play a short sound cue, making it much harder to miss. Keep in mind that if the special music isn't playing, catching the shiny Pokemon will reset your shiny rate back to 1 in 8100, and you'll have to build your chain back up to get another decent shot at seeing a shiny patch. Your shiny rate won't reset if the music was playing, and it also won't reset if you do anything other than catch the shiny, including KOing it or ignoring the shiny patch entirely. And there we have it. There's everything there is to know about Kalos' version of the Poké Radar. If you're interested in the technical workings in even more detail, I'll link to Anubis' companion post where she breaks down how the game selects each patch, how grass is stored in memory, and more, so go check it out. Hopefully this guide helps you find some cool Kalos shiny Pokemon ahead of Legends ZA. And thanks for watching.